I'm super excited because I get to do one of my favorite hobbies, and that is embroidering. And so embroidering is just stitching on a design or an image on some fabric with some needles and thread. And so what we're going to need is, first off, embroidery floss, which is just thread that is colorful that we use for embroidering. We're going to need needles to get the thread through the fabrics. These are very sharp, so if you're not allowed to use sharp things, make sure you have your parents to help, or just be very, very careful when using these needles. To show you the stitches, I'm going to be using some fabric on an embroidery loop, and an embroidery loop just keeps this fabric nice and tight so the stitches go through nicely. But the project I'm going to be working on is embroidering this hat, so you can use an embroidery loop to make a picture on it, or you can use a t-shirt or a hat to make your design. So that's what I'm going to be using, and let me show you some stitches. Alright, so this is the embroidery floss. Each string of floss is made up of 6 individual threads. So what I need to do is separate the threads. I'm going to do 3 and 3. So you just cut a piece of the string and then split it down the middle. Alright, so now that I split my floss, I get to thread it through the needle, and basically as carefully as you can, just poke the thread through the eye of the needle, like so. So now that the needle is threaded, I'm going to find the end of the 2 strings, and I'm going to make a knot at the end. So to make a knot, you find the end of the strings, you make a loop, and then you feed the ends through the loop and pull. And that's how you make a knot. Alright, so the first stitch is going to be the back stitch, and what you want to do is grab the needle and you want to feed it through the back of the fabric, and see that knot makes sure that the floss won't go all the way through the fabric. So then you poke the needle one step ahead, and from the back you poke another space in front and you feed it all the way through. And then what we do here is poke the needle right in the same place as the end of the last stitch. So what you're doing is going backwards to make each next stitch. To end the stitch, you want to tie a knot on the back by making a loop. So what I do is feed the needle through one of the stitches in the back, and you see how a loop is created right here? Then I feed my needle through the loop, and as I pull, a knot is formed right at the base of the stitching. And I usually make 2 or 3 knots just to secure it. And then you want to go ahead and cut off the extra thread with a pair of scissors. Like so. And then you have your back stitch. Alright, so the next stitch is called the running stitch, and it's very similar to a back stitch in that it creates a pretty straight line to make a border or an outline. And so you want to poke your needle through the back of the fabric again and make 1 stitch like so. But instead of feeding your needle backwards, once you poke it again through the back, you're just going to poke it forward again. So you're going to create a space, like a dotted line. And so you just poke it again through the back, feed it again 1 step forward, and you create a dotted line called a running stitch. The next stitch is a stem stitch, and so we start the same by feeding the needle through the back, and then you poke it 1 step ahead and then poke it out right next to the beginning of the first stitch. And what you do is that you go forward and then you feed it right next to the end of the first stitch. So unlike a back stitch, we're not poking the needle in the same hole as the end of the last stitch. You're poking it right next to it, And what this does is that you create a hole to the side and it creates a more diagonal pattern to the stitch, which makes it easier to create curves and spirals using this stitch because it just turns super easy. Um, so if you ever want to create a spiral or a curve, using the stem stitch is the most effective stitch. So a couple last tips. It's normal to tangle up the thread as you are embroidering. You just have to be pretty careful and make sure you keep an eye on where the rest of your string is and that your needle is not accidentally um, feeding through it in the back of the loop because that could make knots and those could be hard to take out. So yeah, you just want to make sure that each stitch is clean and not to create knots on accident. And you can always undo a stitch if something does knot up or if the threads start like going kind of crazy. It's all right to just fix that and take your time with it. And I can't teach you all of the embroidery stitches that exist. These are just some of the very basic first three, but there are a ton of stitches that make really cool designs and patterns. There are even knots that can create shapes like flowers and roses. Those are super cool. But I think starting off with these three is super cool because you can make anything using these three, and then working your way up to more difficult stitches is the way to go. So hopefully this will give you a good starting point. Alright, so now I'm going to move on to embroider my hat, and so I have my design drawn on the hat. I just grabbed a pen and kind of lightly outlined it. I made it dark so you guys could see the design, but that's it. And then I grabbed some embroidery floss. I chose this teal color and I threaded it on my needle already. So I'm just going to start embroidering. The thing with hats though is that this fabric is a lot thicker than just a normal piece of fabric. You can see from the inside there's this seam here, and sometimes it's really hard to pull the needle through this, so you just have to be really careful with your fingers. But otherwise I'm just going to start, and I'm going to start stitching with a back stitch. So I'm going to start at the base right here. Kind of hard. There we go. And you just want to constantly check the back to see how your stitching is going. Okay, so right here my thread is pretty small, so I think I'm going to knot it on the back and then start again with a longer thread. So that's it for this project. I hope you guys like how I embroidered my hat with a little love sign. I think it looks super cool and cute, and I hope you guys learned a little bit about embroidering. There's a lot more stitches and knots that I didn't go over, but they can make some really cool designs using those, so definitely give out embroidering a try. You can embroider your hats, your shirts, shoes, or just some fabric on an embroidery loop to make a really nice picture. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. See you guys next time. Bye!